What's up, guys? This is Josh here. I am recording this on New Year's Eve, so I hope you guys had a happy holiday season, have a safe and happy New Year. But with it being the last day of 2019, I wanted to give you my official 2020 video game predictions. To keep the video somewhat concise and short, I only did two from each of the first parties, Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo, and then I threw three in from the major third parties, so EA, Ubisoft, and Activision. But anyway, so let's jump right in. Let me pull out my notes here. So the first one is Sony, and what I wanted to start with is that the PS5 release date will be November 13th of obviously 2020. It will cost $4.99 US, and only one SKU will be available at launch. So I was looking at the calendar, and it could have been the 13th, it could have been the 20th. The Friday after that is Black Friday, so it would be, it's unheard of that they would release it on Black Friday or anything after, the holiday season, the shopping season starts. They could release it in October, but to me that seems a little too soon. That mid-November seems kind of the sweet spot. And as far as it only being one SKU, I think that, if for those that remember with the PS3, they tried to do multiple SKUs and it just kind of muddled the messaging. They had the 20 gig PS3. They had one, I think it was maybe a 40 or a 60 gig, which that alone would have been fine. But then depending on which version you got, it only had a certain number of USB ports and other ports in them. And so it was confusing to the mainstream consumer, and even to a lot of the quote unquote hardcore gamers, on which SKU did what. And so I think that, obviously they didn't do that with the PS4. They more streamlined it, and I think that they'll continue that. As we get more familiar, with this generation, the incremental upgrades, I think, people are used to doing that with cell phones, and, they're becoming used to the idea of PS4 Pros and Xbox One X's. So I think we'll see that trend continue, at least on Sony's part, but more on that later. My second prediction for Sony is that Guerrilla Games launches a reboot/sequel to the Killzone series. It will release on launch day. I was going through the first-party developer roster for Sony, and I think that, obviously Naughty Dog is tied up, unless, they could have a secondary team working on something, but, they're tied up with The Last of Us Part 2. Ghost of Tsushima is going to be PS4 swan song. Sony Bend just had Days Gone release. Dreams is coming out, so it'll probably be another 8 years before we see anything from Media Molecule. Who knows what Polyphony's doing with Gran Turismo. I think it's still too soon to see a sequel to God of War, and I still think it's too soon to see a sequel to Spider-Man, at least for the launch 2020 window. So that kind of narrowed it down to Guerrilla. The other reason I think that is that just this past year, they expanded their team from about 230 to 400 people. So that makes me believe that, they've split off into two teams, and obviously the A team is working on Horizon 2, and then the B team is kind of, again, if my prediction is correct, they're working on a Killzone sequel. So that is it for Sony. Let's move on to Microsoft. Continuing their trend of buying developers for their expanding first-party stable, Microsoft will acquire at some point this year Remedy Games, and they will announce a reboot or a sequel to Alan Wake. Control critically did very, very well. It was a lot of people's game of the year. If it wasn't their game of the year, it was on their game of the year list. The game just didn't do well commercially. The month that it released, I think it was in August and in September, it never charted on the NPD. by all accounts, or MPD top 10, by all accounts, it bombed commercially. There was a rumor that Sony was going to scoop them up, but my reading into it between the lines is that because of the commercial shortcomings of that game, that maybe they got spooked and wondered if it was going to be a viable acquisition. But you have to remember that Control was published by 505 Games, and really they just don't have the marketing and advertising budget that a Sony or Microsoft has, which Remedy is still a very talented developer. They make very quirky games that are, again, Alan Wake, Max Payne, Control, and so they're obviously, they know what they're doing, and I think that if they were brought in to a first-party stable where, every time they develop a game and they release a game, they have the marketing budget behind them, I think that, their fortunes could turn very quickly. So that's my prediction on that one. The second one, in direct opposition to the first Sony prediction that I gave, is that I do believe that Microsoft will announce and release 2 SKUs of the next Xbox. They will have their Series X, and I believe that at some point, probably in the summer, maybe E3, they will announce a Series S version that's kind of maybe a smaller hard drive, not quite as powerful, not as many flops. So who knows? The second part of that prediction is that the Series X, the main flagship one that was actually unveiled at the Game Awards, will be $549, with the Series S coming in at $100 cheaper at $449. It launches 11/20, so 1 week after the Sony prediction, and it's 1 week again before Black Friday. With this one, I think that because, I don't know if I said this for the Sony one. Let me back up real quick. Sony it will be $499 is my prediction for the PS5 with the 1 SKU. My prediction is that with as powerful, and I am not a technical person at all, I don't understand the components and the innards of PCs and game consoles and things like that. That's just not something that I'm familiar with. But everything that I've been hearing and reading is that the rumored specs of these consoles is that it would be, unless they took a major hit, they really can't sell it for less than $499 for the flagship models of the Xbox. So my prediction is $549, but to have a somewhat more appealing price, and again, tying into my Sony prediction, if they release a Series S for $100 cheaper, then they would beat, that model would be more attractive. It would be $50 less than the PS5. And so that's kind of that was my justification for that, is that because by all accounts, the Model X is supposed to be on paper a little more powerful than the PS5. It'd be logical to assume that it would be a little more expensive. So I think that it would be, for them, it might make sense to release a lower powered model that would be on the lower end of the price spectrum to be a more attractive option out of the gate. Again, if it ends up being $50 or $70 cheaper than the PS5. So that's it for my two Microsoft predictions. For Nintendo, Breath of the Wild 2, and again, these predictions are pretty safe. You can imagine that. I'm not pulling anything so far out of left field that it's next to impossible to happen. But Breath of the Wild 2 will have its own direct at E3 and announces a release date of October the 9th. It's already been rumored that the sequel will come out this year, although I could see it being delayed to spring 2021. That could easily happen, but I think that initially it will be announced for an October the 9th release date. That is a Friday. That is now it seems to be a typical video game release day is Friday. I don't think we'll get like a giant not like a huge blowout, but we'll see obviously more of the game. We'll see where it takes place in the storyline. I mean, obviously it's a sequel, but you know what I mean. A deeper look into the world and the characters and things like that. And my second one is that we will finally, not necessarily at E3, but we will finally see the Metroid Prime 4 slash Metroid Prime reboot. If you guys remember, I think it's probably been 18 months or even 2 years ago, where the game was well into development and then Nintendo basically scrapped the whole project. They had to start over, and that is the reason why we haven't seen anything on it so far. But I think that the curtain is finally lifted on that game. We see it. I don't know if they'll commit to a release date or even a release window. My guess is 2021. I could see that being an early first Q1, first quarter 2021 game. But I think that we finally get to see what that game is all about. So those are my two Nintendo predictions. A little on the safer side, but hey, with them not releasing a new console, the Switch is doing unbelievably, phenomenally well. It's all about the software. They released the Switch Lite. I could see maybe, actually, I just thought about this. They could, a bonus third prediction for Nintendo. I could see them announcing a Switch Pro version, thinner bezels, bigger battery. They have the handheld version. They have the hybrid version. I think that they could announce just a home console version of the system, where it's it's not meant to be played on the go. It's not meant to be able to switch back and forth. It's just something that you keep plugged into your TV. Better processor, things like that. Nintendo has a history of doing that with their handhelds. You have the 3DS and I'm getting the names confused, but some games were only playable on the newer generations because the software took advantage of that extra hardware and processing power. Totally could see that going with the Switch. So there you go. Bonus third prediction. And then a few of the third parties. Ubisoft. Again, we finally see the next gen version of the Assassin's Creed game. It is the rumored Vikings Ragnarok title. And that'll be exclusive to the next Xbox and PS5. But then just like they did at the beginning of this generation, we actually see a completely different game, completely different time period, different characters that are targeted for the PS4 and the Xbox One X and S consoles. But, if you happen to be a day one early adopter, you do have a brand new Assassin's Creed that's not available on the older hardware. But we, probably E3, I could see that happening, or maybe Paris Games Week, who knows? But yeah, so we'll finally see that. I think that's actually a pretty safe bet. Square Enix, and this one, out of all the predictions that I've gone through, this is probably the one that is the most far-fetched and the least likely to happen. Square Enix at the end of Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 1, after you finish the game, as the credits roll, they take a page out of the MCU, and they actually give you a short teaser, not teaser because it's based off of a 22-year-old game, but a short trailer, 15, 30 seconds tops, just kind of highlighting the next portion of the game. They've already announced, Nomura's already announced that, Part 2 is in some type of active development. And so I think that they could, shove in some scenes from Part 2 into the credits of Part 1, giving you just enough to, whet your appetite, and keep you wanting more. Whatever that may be. Part 1 ends at the end of Midgar, so maybe some scenes, obviously taking place after that, Cosmo Canyon, the Golden Saucer, spoilers, the death of Aerith, So who knows? You know, that again, that I think that is very unlikely to happen. I just thought it would be cool that, you know, as you beat the game, the credits start rolling, you sit through, and then, you know, after, you know, you get the mid credits scene where, you know, it fades to black, and then all of a sudden a short 30-second snippet just kind of, you know, sets up basically what the next part, the next episode of the game would be. I think that would be pretty cool. And then my last prediction is for EA. I think that it's not going to be at E3. I don't think that they can make necessarily a huge deal out of this, but at some point early this year, on a random Tuesday, a blog post, a tweet, something, EA is going to announce that they're basically rebooting Anthem. It'll be akin to, you know, Final Fantasy, the way Final Fantasy 14 did it, the way that No Man's Sky did it, and they're basically going to keep just the bare bones of the game and reboot everything else. The alternative to that, it's not my official prediction, is that they just scrap the entire project and they just quietly let it, you know, right off into the sunset and sweep it under the rug. I would really like to see BioWare go back, and you know, as gamers, we always say we want something new and we want something exciting and fresh, but at the same time, we want more of the same on the, you know, the flip side of that coin. You know, I don't know if we'll see a reboot to Mass Effect. Excuse me. But, you know, there is that rumor that the first 3 are going to be remastered for current gen consoles. You know, Andromeda, even though at launch it was a buggy mess, after a couple patches, it did end up being a very competent, even good game. So who knows? My official prediction, though, is that EA will announce an Anthem 2.0. And they're basically going back to square one to fix this game. Now, whether anybody cares at that point, who knows? I'm sure that there is still a very small but very dedicated hardcore fan base for that game, just like there was for No Man's Sky. You know, and so who knows? I mean, I could see it going either way. I could see them doing a total facelift on it, but at the same time, I could see them never talking and, you know, naming Anthem, or, you know, saying Anthem by name ever again. That's just the way the EA goes. You know, I could see them, you know, yeah, I don't know. So who knows? EA is always a tricky one, it seems like, with stuff like this. It's been a while since there has been any news at Anthem. I think that they're just heads down, plugging away, just like, you know, Hello Games did with No Man's Sky. So who knows? But anyway, guys, those are my official predictions for 2020. Let me know in the comments below if I'm completely off base. I thought it was somewhat tempered. There weren't too many, or I don't think there's a lot that are just completely, again, impossible. I wanted to err on the side of caution, I guess, as it were. But let me know what you guys think. If you agree, you disagree, let me know what yours are. I would love to hear all of that. Drop it in the comments below. Tweet at me at SavePointJosh. Yeah, like I said, you guys have a happy and safe new year, and we'll see you in 2020.